Pencil Kings, 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 Pencil Kings,
I think you've just got to really know what is your target client base and where are they going to be looking.
All right, we're back for another episode of the Pencil Kings podcast, and today we are talking with Conrad Allen, who has a pretty cool project going on and recently changed countries, which I'm always very interested to talk to people who change countries because it's a lot easier said than done, but sometimes it's required for what you want to do. So welcome to the call, Conrad. How are you doing today?
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, good. Still pretty early in the morning, so, and as an artist, most artists are not early morning people, so...
Are you working late into the night these days, or do you have a fairly normal schedule?
I've actually been pretty lucky. I haven't had to do any late nights. I chose to do one, but that was just because I was hooking up with a colleague later that night. But yeah, I haven't had to do any weekends, which is kind of strange, really.
Well, maybe the industry is just getting better at not punishing people, or maybe we're getting more efficient as artists, or the tools are getting I feel like everything's always getting better, but then the requirements are always getting higher too. So it's kind of like a balance.
There's a saying, it's something like, what the hardware man gives, the software man takes away. and it kind of stays true. I mean, we're migrating to a lot more 4K films these days, and 4K, it doesn't, obviously quadruple the pixels, but it's sort of more than that in terms of the work effort, because the reference that's out there is just so much more, it's so much scarcer than 2K reference imagery. It just doesn't work, so you've got to work even harder. And so, the tools do get better, but the requirements keep going up and up and up. And I mean, I'm in a team of about 50 people. It's a huge team for just for map painters and environment artists. And some of the guys there are doing weeknights and weekends. So I think it's just because we're not all on the same film. So I think it's just sort of film based, and whether you're at the start or the end of the push, and how lucky you are with the sort of allocation of work.
Yeah, we're gonna get into talking about luck, I'm pretty sure, in this interview. But why don't you give people just like a 1-minute overview of kind of who you are and what you're doing, I guess is the best place to start.
Right. Well, I'm a map painter for film, which basically means we sort of make backgrounds. It's difficult to really. I've never really figured out how to explain to people what map painting is, but it's depending on your style. My style is to take photo bash essentially, but a lot of map painters will be sort of modelers that will then project imagery. 28, it took me a friggin' long time to break into the industry. I think I started with 3D when I was 18. I was actually the same as you in that I always wanted to make games, and I thought, I loved playing games. So I thought, if I make games, surely that's going to be just as fun, right? Which is very wrong. But so I started doing some structural modeling for an architect, and then I sort of reached a limit in that because I was using SketchUp, and then I went to a games university, got a year through a bachelor in animation, and got some work in Singapore, and got an opportunity to present at SIGGRAPH in LA in 2010. So I deferred my degree, never went back because I just kept getting work, from then on. But a lot of it was just freelance work. It was tough, like for years I was running a loss, and I really only had that opportunity because I had the support of my parents that I could live in their basement basically.
Okay, I wanted to stop there because you said a few really amazing things, and I wanted to point them out in case people are unfamiliar. So, how far into your career would you say were when you're talking at SIGGRAPH? Because I feel like that's a pretty big deal. And for those of you who don't know, SIGGRAPH is like a very large convention for graphic arts. So they've got a lot of scientists. Believe it or not, it's not just all art. There's a lot of scientists, and by scientists I mean like programmers and people who are doing models with physics and all kinds of crazy stuff that's allowing us artists to be more creative. So how did you get there? That's amazing.
Yeah, I think I struck it lucky. I mean, I don't really consider myself a genius to have managed to get there. It was actually the very first professional job that I took that actually landed me that trip. I was using a program called Vue, which is created by a company called Eon Software, and it's if you've heard of it, great. If you haven't, and you've heard of TerraGen, then
awesome.
It's basically the same, and it's just a massive 3D rendering natural environment sort of package. And I used that to create an image for an architectural development. It's a big sort of sub-city in Queensland, Australia, and I had to create this park and the natural sort of plants and make it look as what it would look like in 10 years time. And once I'd finished that, I emailed it the image to the company to say if you want to use this as promotional material. And I think it just so happened that it's kind of a lucky coincidence. They were visiting SIGGRAPH in LA that coming year in like 6 months time, and they invited me to come along and speak on how to create architectural images. So yeah, that's sort of just how it went down. It was a pretty unreal experience, really, having a room full of bums on seats while I think I was 21 or something, 22.
Wow.
And it was the first job I'd done, so I was kind of flying blind at the time.
Wow, that's crazy, and that's awesome. Especially, I feel like sometimes these opportunities come to us, and we feel like we're too new, or we don't know, or we're not the right person. We're just like, oh, I don't think I'm the right guy. But you got to do that. You got to do this stuff. Like it leapfrogs your career.
Yeah. That's probably that's a trait of mine. Of my character is to just take on basically every job that somebody offers me. Like as long as they say yes to the other particulars, like the rate and the timeline and whatever. There's for a good 5 years, not a single job that I took on that I actually know how to do. The jobs were sort of big and sort of far in between them. But the first job I did was that 2D image, and I'd been using Vue for about 2 months, maybe 6 weeks. So I got a call from an old client from my structure modeling, and he said, "Can you do it?" And I was like, "Sure." And the second job I had was in Singapore, which was an animation in the same package, and I'd never even touched the animation when at the point where I got the job. And I tell people exactly what you said. You've got to take the jobs on even if you don't know how to do them, and you'll figure out a way. And if not, like if things fall through the floor, then the worst you can do is you just give them back their money if they've given you anything up front, and you say, "I'm sorry, I stuffed up, thanks and goodbye." And it's at least a lesson in humility at that point.
Yeah, I've had to do that a few times, not necessarily with art, but with some other projects that I had where it's just I thought I could do it, and I didn't end up charging enough. And so when it came to actually producing the project, it's like, oh wow, I messed up on the billing thing, and I don't think I can get basically 10 times more money to see through what we wanted to do. Yeah. So here's your money. I'm sorry this didn't work out. I hope you didn't lose too much time. If you need any assistance, like if I can help you in any way, I'm happy to hop on a call, because I feel like a lot of times just talking with somebody through a problem can be helpful, but it's not the end of the world. Like it's not that bad. Nobody came and beat me up, or we have these weird unfounded fears of what,
Yeah,
the worst that can happen. And
yeah,
when you start to think about them, they're pretty crazy because it very rarely comes even close to that.
yeah. That's exactly right. It's just it's sort of not the end of the world, but it feels like it.
So I'm always curious about sort of, I don't want to call it a hack or secret or whatever, but I don't even want to call it a shortcut. But do you feel that it was because you were using Vue and maybe it had a smaller user base that then you were able to get more exposure? Kind of with the idea that you go maybe sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally to places where you can stand out. Like we've had people on the podcast before who were playing World of Warcraft and then started started like posting their art in the forums for their clan, and all of a sudden they started getting all these commissions because all of a sudden, instead of being an artist on CG Hub or ArtStation or whatever, these big sites, now you're like the only artist and you're a good artist inside this forum, and people are like, dang, I want something from you. Do you feel like that was part of this, like how you're able to accelerate so quickly, that Vue was actually like a great choice in hindsight?
Yeah, absolutely. It's essentially you've got to find your niche, right? But niche kind of has two facets to it. You've got to find your niche in terms of what you're creating, and you've got to find the market that you're creating for. So what you're discussing is, essentially you got to find something that you're better than the majority of other people out there. Either you produce better work or you produce work faster. If it's not a qualitative measure and it's quantitative, then you can beat everyone else. And then you've just got to beat everyone else in that industry. And for me, Vue, there weren't too many people who were really using it for professional purposes. I think part of what got me so much work with it was that I was promoting myself online. So, if you search up a Vue artist or an environment artist, my portfolio was online. It was up to date. So, people would find me that way quite often. And you definitely do have to find a niche. It's just a more efficient way of getting to that end goal. There's a lot of guys out there who say create mods for games. Like there was the DayZ game. Was can't remember his name, but he was hired by Bohemia Interactive, who are the parent company to the game that he created a mod for, and then they went off and created the standalone. The problem is that up front you end up investing a lot of time. Like I can't think of the number of times, I can't count the number of times that I've quoted a job and ended up exceeding it by twice the amount of time or twice the cost, or and this is where I say I've been lucky enough to have the support of my parents, because if you're living by yourself or you're living out of home, you often can't afford to work on something for twice the amount of time because you've got to pay the bills.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's one of the pieces of advice that I often give to people, but I like the counterbalance, which is to work on mods, because there's a lot of people who want to work in video games, and it gives them a chance to get quote unquote professional experience today and have deadlines. But sometimes, these mods, there's all kinds of crazy NDAs I find when you're starting out. I don't know if it's still like that, but nobody wants anyone to know about their big top secret project. So maybe you can't show your work. So it really is important to be getting your name out there. And I remember there's a few artists that I was so excited when I was working in the studio in Winnipeg, and then all of a sudden this guy would show up. One guy showed up. He's from Hungary. And I was talking to him, and he's like, wow, you're the guy that I've been following online. Like, you're the amazing 3D Studio Max programmer. And I always love meeting people from the internet in the real world. But I feel like, just that act of getting your name out there is really helpful. So I guess a follow-up question to that is, because I see a lot of people with their gallery, they get their website set up, maybe with Squarespace or whatever. It looks beautiful, but I feel like they're not going to be getting a whole lot of search engine traffic. And it kind of sounds like that's what you were doing, was a little bit of search engine traffic, or was it some other way that you were allowing people to get to your blog?
Yeah, it's not really clear how much work I got through search engine traffic. I think I might have got like one or two maximum jobs through directly through the email form on the website, on my website. And but I usually make a point of asking a client how they found out about me. I mean, I've stopped now because I'm getting enough work. But that's kind of a key thing, is especially when you're starting out, ask them, just say, do you mind me asking, how did you actually find out about me? Like what made you choose to contact me? And when I was first starting out, and I had got that animation job, I asked the guy, and he said, "Oh, on your website you have this image, and it was basically exactly what we wanted to create, so that's why you got the job." And I was like, "Wow, that's the particular image that he was talking about was actually one that I'd considered taking down. It wasn't a great image, but he was right. It did depict what they were trying to create. But yeah, I don't think you need to worry about like search engine optimization and putting ads out there and that kind of stuff. But you do have to be aware of where are your clients going to look in order to find you. Are they if you're looking for a concept artist, you might go to conceptart.org, or if you're looking for a commission piece, you might look on DeviantArt. It just depends. I mean, both of those kind of indicate that the client is probably just somebody that you probably don't really care to get work for, because like ultimately everyone wants to get the big glory jobs, some massive job, not like paint an image for like a couple of $100, in your room. But you have to know where are your clients going to be looking. And for me, trying to get into the film industry, the key was to look on film industry visual effects job boards, and that was sort of where a lot of my job hunting would come from. In the early days, because I went to SIGGRAPH, I then got a little sort of article excerpt on the Eon Software website, which brought me a lot of traffic to my website, because people would view their company website a lot more than searching for me. So that sort of brought me a couple of clients, but I think it's just sort of what I'm getting at is it's an all-round thing. You've just got to really know what is your target client base and where are they going to be looking.
So I got a question now. If you were to go back in time to that freelance self, because I know we have a lot of listeners that are interested in doing freelance. We have some courses on Pencil Kings that I think are really good about matte painting, and it's really amazing how quickly things can come together. Like you could, obviously there's a real mastery level that you can get to things, but even as a beginner, you can start to like, wow, I didn't realize you could start to just assemble these things, and it can come together quite nicely. But if you were to go back in time and advise yourself when you were starting, like you already know how to use Photoshop and the tools and whatnot, but you're just starting your freelance career, what would you tell yourself as advice, knowing the sort of like the mistakes that you had and the successes that you had? Where would you focus more of your time, and where would you say like, definitely don't do this? Because I feel like we all have a few of those don't do this thing again mistakes in our past.
That's a strange question, because for me, there's nothing that I've done that at my current position I don't see as useful. For instance, going back, I when I first bought a camera, I took it to work, which I was a security guard, and I was just like toying through the settings, and I didn't even know what the difference was between, well, I kind of knew, but I didn't know, like ISO, shutter speed, and aperture confused the hell out of me, because I'm like, but I could just crank the ISO and I'd get the same result as if I do this. And so I played around with it, and I took all sorts of horrible photographs with like ISO settings up at like 6400, and then there's the environment stuff, the 3D environment stuff, which I basically don't do any of at the moment anymore, really. The last time I did a 3D environment was like 2.5 years ago. And compositing in After Effects, which I haven't launched. I've done particle effects in After Effects. I've done wedding videos, for like an invite, like animated invite, which I did in After Effects. And in hindsight, you might think, it was kind of a waste of time, but everything adds up, and it means that when the opportunity comes that you can step into a film studio, you'll blow away everyone else. I only started really using Photoshop 2 years ago. So at that point, I knew how to use a brush and paint on white canvas, and I didn't have really any idea about anything else. But it was the understanding of lighting, composition, 3D form, depth, scaling, all of that I got from my 3D experience in environments that I was then able to, once I started doing things in Photoshop, I was like, oh wow, this is easy. Like, oh, that mountain looks too big, I'll scale that down because the elements next to it are too small or something. So I don't really, like, if I went back, I'd probably tell myself either one of two things. I'd say just start using Photoshop, because that's inevitably where I wanted to be, was a map painter. And I was afraid of photo bashing. Like, I just would look at concept artists and go, oh, I can't do that. Or the other thing would be just to find a studio, especially ones that do training in-house, and just go there and do the course and network in the studio, because forget about like going to university to do a visual effects course, or like Vancouver Film School, those kinds of things. I just wouldn't bother. I'd just go straight to the source where you can then get a foot in the door and climb your way up. The only flip side to that is just be careful that you've got to go to that course, and you've got to be the absolute friggin' best in your intake. Otherwise, somebody else is going to get that job, and you're going to be left to the scraps, essentially, of whatever other studios are happy to pick you up. And that's what you want to do to get your leg in the door. Like, that's the one that like a lot of people say, oh, you've got to network, and you've got to there's a bit of luck, and actually it's a lot of luck. But doing a course in a studio is the one way to get in the door without the luck having to play a part.
So this is blowing my mind, because I've thought about this, like, how do you get in for a long time? I've always really tried to push. You do a lot of work, but it's all about the network, and you never know who's going to open what doors. So it's just like meet as not necessarily as many people as you can, but kinda. However, which studios are, for example, do in-house training? Because I've never heard of this. I know that there's studios that when you get hired, then they have classes and courses that you can take. I think a lot of them do. Yeah. But do you pay to learn? Like, they kind of have a college that's helping be the pipeline for new recruits, or how does that work? Because I haven't heard it before, and it's awesome.
Well, I'm sure that NPC does it, because I read an article that was posted just at the start of this year about NPC's course, and they actually have a reputation for sort of hiring juniors, but they also have a reputation for paying a junior's rate. But yeah, I suppose it just depends. You've got to, if you're in Stuttgart in Germany, you've got to look at the studios around there and see if there is one that has it, because ideally you wouldn't be flying all the way around the world to, say, South Australia, where there's Rising Sun, and they have a course where you actually are in the building, and that's the kind of key thing you want. Is that's the way I got in. Is I did, like, after all these years, I did one of these courses, and it was just a 10-week intensive in like the basics. But we were in the house in studio, and we could walk around and see what the teams were working on. And I just every sort of maybe twice a week, I just walked past some map painters, saw what they were doing, sparked up a little conversation for 2 minutes. You gotta remember, keep it balanced, because a lot of these guys are really busy, and you've got to gauge how much you bother them. But that's the kind of thing you want to do is get in and sort of bug the right guys, bug the people that you want to be involved with. And that said, like, for that situation what I was in, I ended up out of that course going into a junior matte painter's position there, and then another course started, and we had 3 of the people in that course wanted to be matte painters, and none of them, one of them had some experience, but the other 2 had no experience, and everyone just sort of was like, okay, we're like, if you want to go into a art role, you're going to have some kind of something to back it up, right? But there's plenty of jobs out there in the film industry that are for, I have no skills at all, and mostly that's like roto and prep work and 3D tracking. So if you want to be a 2D artist, you go to roto. If you want to be a 3D artist, you go to tracking, and they are like your sort of rite of passage for somebody who doesn't know anything. And so if you feel like you don't have any skills, you can still bug the right people. You just bug the roto guys or the 3D tracking guys, and you just try and like get on good terms with them, find out what they're doing, find out what that is challenging them at the time, talk about them, that'll get you remembered a bit more, and try and get your foot in the door via something that is available to juniors, because a lot of people think that I can just go straight to compositing, or I can do effects work, or become a matte painter, they just make background images, I'll just learn on the job. But the problem is, yeah, you will, but there's not many of those jobs available, because there are certain skills required, and it's just so much harder to get into than, say, roto or 3D tracking,
Yeah, I think that's, again, this has been an amazing interview, I think, for just the sort of like the very clear path that people can take to get into this, because I haven't heard it said so clearly, the common advice of just be a badass. I find it doesn't serve people very well, but that's often the mindset that I see a lot of people have, is that they feel like they can't move forward with their career, or the thing that they want to do, which is usually they just want to work in games or in film.
Yeah.
They might say, I want to design the characters for the film, but I'm willing to bet that if people could just get a job working on a cool film, like even if you were the guy who painted out rubble or painted rubble bits on an Avengers movie, you would just be blown away and having so much fun, because you're actually working on the film, and your stuff, you will see it on the screen. It doesn't matter that if you're not doing the characters, and that's something that you can work towards. But blown away with this advice. It's amazing.
That's actually a good point, because last year I was working with a woman from Weta who came across, and she was an effects artist, and she wanted to get into matte painting. So she, looked out there, and then eventually found a matte painting position, which is in the team I was in. And she wasn't, I'll be honest, she wasn't an outstanding matte painter, but the fact that she had a couple of years experience as an effects artist meant that the studios knew that she knew what Shotgun was and how to use it. She was familiar with Linux and camel case and terminal command line execution, all of that sort of stuff, and probably actually most importantly, she was employable in a film sense. Another studio, Weta, was like, yeah, we've kept her on here for like 2-3 years. She is producing work that we can use. She's integrating well, like that kind of stuff. So yeah, like just getting in on any level means you can then move laterally into whatever position you want to be in, and doesn't mean that you might have to wait 5 years to work on character. I mean, there's literally a line out the door of people who want to become matte painters, and it's one of the most difficult professions. So like if you're listening and that's all you want to do, then it is, I will just say, it is hard to get into. It's hard because it doesn't lend itself to a junior's role. You need to know so much in matte painting, because like let's take modeling for instance. You model a building, somebody else then gets to texture that building because they're the texturing department. So they're in charge of the colors that it has. And then that goes to the shading department, which then gives it the surface details and the sort of what what it feels like. And then that goes to lighting, and then maybe to effects as well to destroy it. And there's this multi-process thing, and then eventually it goes to comp, who just motion blur and depth field it out, and you're like, sweet. And see that blur in the background? That was me. But matte painting is just, you've got to create everything. You've got to have form right. You've got to have depth. You've got to have your lighting direction right. The number of times I've done something, painted something, I've spent like 4 or 5 days on something, and the client said, "Oh no, the sun's supposed to be over there. Oh, just move the sun over." And you're like, no, it doesn't work that way. You've got reference imagery that casts shadows in a certain direction. You can't just change the sun and make it backlit or front lit or slightly more side lit. So it's an extremely unforgiving profession, and you've got to, it's got to hold up to a film standard straight out of your hands. It doesn't go into anyone else's except for the compositors. So it's just the most unforgiving profession. And there's actually an article written by a guy at NPC, which I'll find in a minute, so that people can sort of search it up. But he explains the sort of things that you need to know as a matte painter, and why that means it's so difficult to become a junior in a matte painter's role, because there are so many different things to know before you even step into that role. And he then also goes on about the NPC course. So the article is in some ways a bit of a fluff for NPC's own course, but the first half of it is extremely relevant information.
Well, yeah, we can follow up, and we'll get the link, and we'll put it on the Pencil Kings website with this article and with the notes. So we'll have all the links and everything there. So we'll make sure to get that included. But before we sort of wrap up, we've gone a little bit longer, but I think the advice here was so good that is really worth a re-listen to probably the last 10 or 15 minutes, because it's just killer. Like, from me to you, the people listening, this is really amazing advice that I'm blown away. And we're almost at 100 episodes in, and this is new stuff. So I'm so glad that we keep interviewing people, because we keep kind of demystifying different ways to get into the industry and to get people what they really want to do. But before we wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit about your new project or side project. I'm not sure what you're going to call it, but I'll let you kind of introduce it. But you've been collecting tons and tons and tons of photos, which is always a good idea as an artist. Doesn't matter if you're a 3D artist, 2D artist, whatever you're doing, but just collecting photos and observing life and building this library of your own that's royalty free and you can use in all different kinds of situations. It's so helpful, and it's something that pretty much there's a lot of artists that you work with, but then there's sort of like that next level, the people who are the leads, or the people who are going to be leads very soon, because they're so into it and immersed in it, and they're always building a library. Almost everybody.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, could you tell us a little bit about your new project? Because I think it's really fascinating. It's something that Google search only gets you so far, and it's really that gap is always widening. I don't know if people realize this, but we started off in this interview talking about how technology is advancing, so the standards, the quality of art that we have to produce as artists is always being raised, because all of a sudden, instead of having a 1024 monitor, all of a sudden now we've got 4K monitors. So there's a lot more detail, and people can zoom in on things and say like, hey, this looks really bad. Whereas before it would just be a blurry smudge, and you'd be like, yeah, that's good. And we get used to these updated standards, and all of a sudden we can't go back, So yeah, let us hear about what you've been working on.
Yeah, well, like as you say, the problem with Google Images is sort of multifaceted. You can't find exactly what you want, and then if you do find what you want, it's not the right resolution, or the exposure's got wrong, or there's JPEG artifacting. Like, there's all kinds of things, and then you've got the problem of royalty, right? So you can't just copy an image off Google and just use it. If somebody sees it and says, "Oh, that's my image," you can get sued. And there are companies out there that specifically work in looking for copyright infringement in films, and they'll just make their money by sort of sending an email and say, hey, we found your image in this film, do you want us to represent you? And they'll get like 10 grand or something, and it's like done. Anyway, that's one problem. The other problem, as you say, with moving to 4K monitors, and the resolution has to be suitable to that. So what this project is about is providing reference imagery at resolutions that are good for matte painters and film specifically, and that's why it's called mappaint.com. So, but it can be used for advertising, for TV shows, for commercials on TV, concept artists, and the images on there we're just storing them as the raw file. So you can pick up the raw HDR panorama, which is what we shoot mostly for our own catalog. We've picked up a total of about 215,000 photos from other photographers, and we've actually just got one more photographer who's going to be contributing as well. But the images that we take ourselves are all HDR, they're all panorama. So a lot of the images can be up to, I've got a couple that are in the 60,000 pixel wide sort of range, which is enormous. You can download the DNG, the raw file essentially, but we're also storing them as JPEGs because we realize that not often do you really need the negative file to adjust the white balance or the exposure or lift the blacks. Like essentially what you see in film, for the most part, they want it to look like it was shot through a camera. So you don't really want to tone map an HDR. So you can download the different exposures as well as JPEGs, and you can download them at different resolutions. Now you might think this is going to cost a load, but actually it's sort of around about the ballpark of other subscription services. So I think we're aiming to have our sort of base rate at a subscription rate at about $120, I think, US dollars a year, which is $10 a month. It's the same that you pay for Photoshop and Lightroom, and that'll get you something like 50 credits per month, and that might get you. Obviously it depends on the resolution of the image that you're downloading. If you want to download a whole bunch of 2K images, that's fine. And that'll obviously be less than a 60K image because there's more data there. So we're still in development at the moment. We really want to nail the user experience, which we sort of modeling off Lightroom because like a lot of matte painters will use Lightroom and a lot of artists use it as a personal reference library. So we figure that why swim against the current? Let's just go with that flow. And at the moment we're hoping to launch July 4th, but it's sounding like it'll have to be pushed back. We really want to get the experience correct. But for now we will be having a launch discount. So if you go to the website and you can sign up to the mailing list so that you know exactly when we do launch and jump on it, because I plan to have it be, if I have my way, it'll be a pretty significant discount to start with.
Awesome. I know when I was working in games and film, like these reference libraries are kind of invaluable. It saves you so much time and gives you access to so many different things because sometimes you can't just afford or you don't have the time to fly around the world to all these cool locations. And so it's great to have people who are already out there doing it and willing to share their work, just to make everybody's lives easier. So
yeah, that's it. And it really does speed up your work because if somebody says, give me some, especially skies. Skies are so easy to take photos of. You just point the camera, take a couple of snaps, stitch them together, you're done. And you get a library of your own stuff and you'll work so much faster. I just did a job for Ford and a job on the 100, the third season, and the title sequence. And, I had two days on the Ford job and 3 days on the title sequence. And I wouldn't have been able to get that done if I didn't have this, my own library. It would have taken me twice as long, or if not longer, just because of finding the images.
Even more killer advice, and I feel like if you're listening, you're like, well, that's all well and good if you have these, amazing cameras that people like Conrad have. It doesn't have to be like that. Like, you just start where you're at, and maybe in a year you save up and you get that good camera. But right now you've got your phone. That's like literally enough to start building these reference libraries. You don't have to wait for anybody to give you permission or anything like that. Just do it.
Yeah, that's so true. You can get a like $400 camera, which is actually the camera that I started off with, which I still use the reference images from that camera, and they'll be on the website as well. I sold it for $250 about a year ago. So, you can get a second-hand camera for pennies, really, for less than most phones, and yeah, just start making your library that way.
All right, well, we should wrap up here. So, Conrad, why don't you shout out your website URLs, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, cool. So, mattpaint.com is the big one. That's MATTE, so not MAT. But I'm sure that everyone knows that. And my own personal website is conrad3d.com. You can find a email form on there. If you want to contact me, feel free to go ahead and just send me an email. I love to hear from people. I always give as much advice as I can. And actually, I was going to mention, I was at dinner last night with a couple of people. It was like 5 people, and one of them was the image engine environment supervisor, and the other was the on-set visual effects suit for the 100. And then there were 2 guys who were from another studio, and in conversing with them, you could tell immediately which of everyone was in the senior positions, because like the point I'm getting at is like don't be like socially backwards. Like, think about if you notice the people at the top of the chain, like if you don't want to be there, that's fine. Like, there are people who just want to do their work, go home, do their other projects, or climb to a senior position and just do the fun work, but not actually have any say in any of the politics, which is totally fine, and it's kind of awesome. But if you notice those people, the people at the top are like they're the 10%, and the rest is the 90%. And the thing is, the 10% get paid 90% of the wage, and and vice versa. So notice the social interactions that they go through, and just try and appeal to those people. And I mean, it's easier said than done, but that said, it's something that if you take note of, for instance, I went to a games university. The librarian would have a can of deodorant ready on his desk for anyone who walked in there who smelled, and that was probably like 3/4 of the guys. It was just disgusting. And it's one of those small things. You're like, well, put some deodorant on, or shower, or wash your clothes. There's little things like that you can pick up on and will help you. Just like they're just such easy things to add, and will get you a massive return.
More amazing advice. I'll give one little personal story. I remember that for where I started, I didn't really care about how I dressed, and I kind of dressed goofy because I like to. My personality was like the goofball in the office, that I like to make everyone happier around me, which I think is a valuable thing. Like to have be a good team player and make people happy to be at work. But as I got more senior in my roles, I realized that the people at the top were dressing better, like nicer shoes. It doesn't mean you need to have like dress in a suit, or of course not, but there's definitely a style difference, and it just applies to everything. So yeah, I think that's amazing advice. Again, just to start to take notice. What are the things that they're talking about? Are they talking about software all the time? Are they talking about other lifestyle things? In the last position, people were talking about high-end watches. Could I afford a high-end watch? No. But you could still be interested in it, and so you can take part in the conversation. And these are just like little cues that are it's not things that you learn in school. It's just sort of just like general life skills, which is amazing. So thank you so much, Conrad. I really appreciate it. And we will have the show notes from this at pencilkings.com/podcast, where you can see this episode and all the other episodes, and we'll have links to Conrad's site and the article that he was talking about earlier. And if you are down for it, I would really appreciate if you could leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, because it helps us get the podcast out to more people, and it's just a small thing that really helps us get the word out to more people, and so we can help them. So thanks a lot, Conrad, and have an awesome Thursday.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Scope demands patience, skill, years of practice.
Ah, you talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.